All right, let's get right into it. We're about to pull back the curtain on the hiring process and look at a hidden flaw that honestly affects almost every company out there. But we're also going to talk about a really elegant solution called test score banding. And trust me, once you get this concept, it'll totally change how you think about hiring. So here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we'll pinpoint the problem with how we typically use test scores. Then we'll introduce test score banding as the answer. After that, we're diving straight into a pretty fascinating debate between two different ways of doing it, breaking down four key differences before we finally get to the verdict on which one to use. Okay, part one, hiring's hidden flaw. I call this the problem with perfect scores because it really gets to the heart of a mistake that tons of hiring managers make, and they don't even know they're doing it. Let's kick things off with a simple question. Imagine you're looking at two job candidates. Both seem great, but on the skills test, one gets a 92%, the other a 91. I mean, the choice is obvious, right? You go with the higher score. But what if I told you that 1 point difference is totally meaningless, just statistical noise? Yeah, that 1 point difference might not matter at all because of something called measurement error. Look, as our sources point out, no test is perfect. Think about it like a bathroom scale. You step on it, get a number, step on it again a second later, and you might get a slightly different number. That little fluctuation, that's measurement error, and it happens with every kind of test. So when a company just blindly hires from the top score down, they're taking a massive risk. They're basically assuming every single point difference means something real. And in doing so, they could be rejecting an absolutely fantastic candidate who scored a 91 for someone who scored a 92, when that tiny gap is probably just noise. It completely ignores that tests aren't perfect.
So if that strict ranking system is flawed, what's the alternative? Well, that brings us to section 2. Let's look at test score banding, which honestly is a beautifully elegant solution to this exact problem.
The whole idea, which was first floated by Cascio and his colleagues back in 1991, is just brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of obsessing over a strict rank order, you group a range of scores together. So anyone who scores within that band is considered to have a statistically equivalent score. That 92 and that 91, suddenly they're on a level playing field. So how does this actually work in practice? It's pretty much a four-step process. 1. You test everybody. 2. You use the test's own reliability data to figure out how wide the score band should be. 3. You treat all the scores inside that band as equal. And then, and this is the magic part, for all those people inside the band, you can use other things like interviews or experience to make your final call. But you know how it is, it's never that simple. And this brings us right to the heart of our explainer in section 3, a tale of two methods. This is where a major scientific debate kicks off about the right way to actually create these bands. So in one corner, you've got the original, the traditional approach from Caccio's team. And in the other corner, you have the challenger, the alternative approach, which was proposed about 7 years later by Hermann Aquinas and his colleagues. And as you're about to see, they don't exactly see eye to eye on some pretty fundamental stuff. And this is where the debate gets really juicy. It all boils down to one simple question. See, both sides agree that scores have errors. They just disagree on what kind of error we should be worried about the most when we're building these bands. Is it just the error in the test itself? Or is there something bigger at play? Okay, let's really dive in here. For section 4, we are going to unpack this whole debate by breaking it down into 4 critical differences that really separate the traditional and the alternative methods. The absolute biggest difference is all about validity. The traditional approach is focused on what's called content validity. It basically just asks, hey, does our test measure the right knowledge and skills? But the alternative approach says, hold on, that's not enough. It focuses on criterion-related validity, which asks a much better question. How well does this score actually predict who will be good at the job? It's a huge shift from what the test measures to what it can predict. And you can really hear the alternative camp's whole philosophy in this quote. Their argument is super pragmatic. If you have data that links your test scores to how people actually perform, why on earth would you just ignore it? Using that data gives you a way clearer picture of what you really care about, which is success on the job. So this philosophical difference leads directly to our second point, the actual width of the bands themselves. Because the traditional approach is only worried about error in the test, it creates narrower bands. The alternative approach, though, which is accounting for error in the test and error in predicting job performance, it almost always creates wider bands, grouping way more people together. Let's just visualize this for a second. Let's say your top applicant scored a 94. Well, using the traditional method, the band might include scores from 90 all the way up to 94. Everybody in this little group is now considered equal. But now, if you use the alternative method for that same top score of 94, the band could be much wider. Maybe it stretches all the way from an 87 up to a 96. As the source material points out, the traditional band is almost always completely swallowed up by the alternative one. You just end up with a much larger pool of candidates who are all considered statistically the same. So why should we care about wider bands? Well, it's all about avoiding false negatives. Great employees that you accidentally screen out. With a narrow band, you might throw out a candidate with an 89, even if their predicted performance is identical to someone who scored a 94. In a tight labor market like today's, you just can't afford to be losing qualified applicants like that. Difference number 3 follows right from this. It's the choice of a criterion. See, the traditional method doesn't even need one. It's just looking at the test scores themselves. But the alternative approach is completely built on predicting performance, so it requires the company to pick a criterion measure, a specific way to define and measure success in that role. And criterion measure sounds really technical, but it's not. It's just the real-world data you use to see how well someone is doing their job. It could be anything from supervisor performance ratings to customer satisfaction scores, or even hard numbers like sales data or how quickly someone completes projects. Okay, our final difference gets a bit more into the weeds, but it's important. It's all about reliability. People using the traditional approach have to choose a reliability estimate for their test. Now, some critics said the alternative approach was way too complex because you need a reliability estimate for the test and for your job performance measure. But as Aguinas and his team pointed out, this is a challenge both approaches have to deal with. They just apply it to different parts of the hiring puzzle. So, after breaking down all these differences, validity, bandwidth, criteria, reliability, we finally get to our last section, the one that really matters, the final verdict. Which one of these methods should a company actually be using? Ultimately, the authors give us a really clear and practical verdict. The choice is actually pretty simple. If you have absolutely no data linking your test scores to actual job performance, then yeah, you should probably stick with the traditional approach. But if you do have that data, they argue you should absolutely use the alternative approach. It just uses more relevant information, and that gives you a much better prediction of who will actually succeed. In the end, this entire debate really just comes down to one core question, and it's the thought I want to leave you with. When you're hiring, what's your ultimate goal? Is it to find the person with the most precise test score? Or is it to find the person with the most precise prediction of future success? Your answer to that tells you everything you need to know.